The distant thunder of hooves rattling across the dusty plains caught Penelope Vickers' attention as she stepped off the stagecoach, her weary eyes squinting against the harsh Wyoming sunlight. Hawthorne was supposed to be just another stop on her journey westward, a brief reprieve, before continuing to San Francisco, where she hoped to finally outrun the ghosts of her past. She hadn't planned on staying more than a night, maybe two. But fate, it seemed, had other designs. Penelope smoothed down her travel-worn dress and adjusted her small hat, tucking a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear as she surveyed the main street of Hawthorne. The year was 1876, and like many frontier towns that had sprung up in the wake of the Civil War, Hawthorne was a curious blend of rough-hewn ambition and desperate hope. "Madam, your luggage," the stagecoach driver said, handing down her worn leather trunk. "Thank you," she replied, reaching into her reticule for a coin to tip him. "Could you direct me to a reputable boarding house?" The driver pointed toward a whitewashed two-story building at the end of the street. "Mrs. Holloway runs the cleanest place in town. Tell her Bart sent you." With a grateful nod, Penelope gathered her belongings. At 26, she had already lived several lifetimes, it seemed. Widowed just a year after her marriage when influenza took her husband, she'd spent the last 3 years working as a schoolteacher in Chicago, until the memories became too much to bear. The advertisement seeking teachers in California had seemed like providence. As she made her way down the dusty street, the sound of childish laughter drew her attention to a small boy chasing a wooden hoop along the boardwalk. She smiled, momentarily distracted, when suddenly the boy lost control of his hoop, sending it rolling directly into her path. "Careful." She called out, but it was too late. The child, no more than 5 or 6 years old, barreled into her legs, nearly toppling her over. "Samuel," a deep voice rang out from across the street. "What have I told you about running wild?" Penelope steadied herself as a tall man in a worn leather vest and dusty boots strode toward them. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the concern etched across his sun-weathered features. "I'm sorry, Pa," the boy said, his blue eyes wide with contrition as he retrieved his hoop. Then, turning to Penelope, he added, "I'm sorry, madam. I didn't mean to knock you down." "No harm done," she replied kindly, brushing the dust from her skirts. The man reached them, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of wheat fields in late summer. "My apologies for my son's exuberance, madam. Samuel gets carried away sometimes." "It's quite all right," Penelope assured him. "Boys will be boys after all." "I'm Kieran Ivers," he introduced himself with a slight bow of his head. "And this wild one is Samuel. Pleased to meet you both. I'm Penelope Vickers." "You're new to Hawthorne," Kieran observed. "It wasn't a question. Just passing through," she confirmed. "I'm on my way to San Francisco." "San Francisco?" Samuel's eyes grew wide. "That's far, isn't it, Pa?" "Indeed it is," Kieran replied, his gaze still fixed on Penelope. "What takes you so far west, if you don't mind my asking?" "A teaching position," she answered, suddenly conscious of his scrutiny. There was something in his deep hazel eyes that made her feel transparent, as though he could see the sorrow she tried so hard to conceal. "We need a teacher here," Samuel exclaimed, bouncing on his toes. "Our last one left to get married, and Pa says—" "That's enough, Samuel," Kieran interrupted, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. To Penelope he said, "Mrs. Holloway's boarding house is just down the way. Allow me to escort you." "That's very kind, but I'm certain I can manage," she demurred. "I insist," he said, reaching for her trunk. "It's the least I can do after Samuel nearly bowled you over." As they walked toward the boarding house, Samuel skipped ahead, his earlier mishap already forgotten. Penelope found herself stealing glances at Kieran. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard work and wide open spaces. There was a quiet dignity about him that she found intriguing. "How long has Hawthorne been without a teacher?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Going on 3 months now," he replied. "The children have been running wild, much to their parents' dismay. The town council's been trying to hire someone, but qualified teachers are scarce in these parts." "I see." She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I can't help." "As I said, I'm just passing through." Kieran's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, disappointment perhaps. Of course, San Francisco's opportunity calls. They reached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, a neat building with white lace curtains and flower boxes beneath the windows, a touch of civilization in the rugged landscape. Before Kieran could knock, the door swung open to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. "Well now, what have we here?" she asked, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Miss Vickers," Kieran introduced. "She's in need of a room." "It's Mrs. Vickers, actually," Penelope corrected gently. "I'm a widow." Something softened in Kieran's expression. "My apologies." "No need," she assured him. To Mrs. Holloway, she said, "I'd like to stay for a night, possibly two, before continuing on to California." "Well, you're in luck. I've a lovely room just opened up yesterday," Mrs. Holloway replied, ushering her inside. "And Kieran Ivers, don't you dare leave that trunk on my porch. Bring it on up to the blue room." As Kieran carried her trunk upstairs, Samuel trailing behind him, Penelope couldn't help but notice the worn wedding band on his left hand. A widower, perhaps, like herself. Or was his wife away or ill? It was none of her business, of course, but curiosity tugged at her nonetheless. Mrs. Holloway showed her to a small but comfortable room with a brass bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "Supper's at 6 sharp," the landlady informed her. "And Kieran, you and Samuel are welcome to stay as well. I've made more than enough stew." "That's mighty generous, Mrs. Holloway, but Samuel and I should be getting back to the ranch. The hands will be wondering where we've gotten to," Kieran declined politely. "Next time, then, Mrs. Holloway said, leaving them alone as she bustled back downstairs. An awkward silence fell. Penelope busied herself with removing her gloves, unsure what to say. "Pa, can't we stay for supper?" Samuel pleaded, tugging at his father's sleeve. "I like Mrs. Holloway's stew." "We have chores waiting, son," Kieran reminded him gently. To Penelope, he added, "If you'd like to see more of Hawthorne before you continue your journey, Samuel and I could show you around tomorrow. It's not San Francisco, but it has its charms." The offer surprised her. "That's very kind, Mr. Ivers, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," he assured her. "Samuel and I come into town every Saturday for supplies anyway. Please say yes," Samuel added, his expression hopeful. "I can show you the creek where I catch frogs and the big rock that looks like a sleeping bear." Penelope found herself smiling despite her reservations. "Well, when you put it that way, how could I refuse?" "Splendid," Kieran said, and for the first time she saw him smile, a warm, genuine expression that transformed his serious face and made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "We'll call for you around 10 if that suits." 10 would be fine, she agreed. After they left, Penelope sat on the edge of the bed, wondering what had possessed her to accept their invitation. She was passing through, nothing more. Getting involved, even casually, with the local residents would only make it harder to leave. And yet, as she unpacked her few belongings, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. True to his word, Kieran arrived promptly at 10 the next morning, Samuel bouncing excitedly beside him. Penelope had dressed with care in her best day dress, a soft blue that complemented her eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Vickers," Kieran greeted, removing his hat. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, his blonde hair neatly combed, his shirt freshly pressed. "Good morning, Mr. Ivers, Samuel," she replied, feeling inexplicably shy. "Are you ready for your grand tour of Hawthorne, Wyoming?" he asked with a slight bow that made Samuel giggle. "Lead on," she said, accepting his offered arm. The tour was far more enjoyable than Penelope had anticipated. Hawthorne might be small, but it was a vibrant community. Kieran introduced her to the local shopkeepers, the blacksmith, and the doctor. They visited the small church, the saloon, though they didn't go inside, and the sheriff's office. Everywhere they went, People greeted Kieran with respect and genuine warmth. "Mr. Ivers seems to be well regarded in town," she observed as they stopped for lemonade at the general store. "Pa's on the town council," Samuel informed her proudly, his face sticky with lemonade. "And he's the best rancher in the whole territory," Kieran chuckled, wiping his son's face with a handkerchief. Samuel exaggerates. "The Double I Ranch is modest compared to some, but it's ours and we work hard." "Double I?" she inquired. "Ivers and Ivers," he explained, ruffling Samuel's hair. "Samuel's my partner." "The best partner," Samuel proclaimed. "The only partner," Kieran corrected with a wink at Penelope, "though sometimes I think he's more interested in frogs than cattle." Their final stop was the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building at the edge of town. It stood empty and forlorn, its windows dusty, the playground silent. 23 children from 6 to 16 used to fill these benches, Kieran said as they stood in the doorway. Now they're helping on their family farms or getting into mischief. "That's a shame," Penelope murmured, running her hand along one of the desks. Teaching had been her salvation after losing her husband, giving her purpose when grief threatened to consume her. She understood all too well what these children were missing. "The town council's offering good wages," Kieran mentioned casually, "and housing. The teacher's cottage is just behind the schoolhouse, small but comfortable." "Mr. Ivers," she began hesitantly. "Kieran, please." "Kieran," she amended. "I have a position waiting in San Francisco." "Of course," he said, his disappointment evident despite his attempt to hide it. "I didn't mean to pressure you, just sharing information." Samuel, who had been exploring the classroom, suddenly appeared at her side. "Were you a teacher before Mrs. Vickers?" "I was, yes," she admitted. "Could you be our teacher?" he asked hopefully. "Billy Thompson said if we don't get a teacher soon, he'll forget all his letters." "Samuel," Kieran admonished gently. "Mrs. Vickers has plans that don't include staying in Hawthorne." The boy's face fell, and Penelope felt a pang of regret. "I'm sure the town will find someone soon," she assured him, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. They walked back to the boarding house in thoughtful silence. As they reached the porch, Kieran cleared his throat. "Mrs. Holloway is hosting a social tonight at the church. Nothing fancy, just some music, dancing, and pie. Would you consider joining us? It might give you a better sense of the community before you decide to leave." Penelope hesitated. A social meant more connections, more people she'd have to say goodbye to. And yet, the prospect of spending another evening in Kieran and Samuel's company was undeniably appealing. "I'd like that," she found herself saying. "Thank you for the invitation." "Wonderful," Samuel exclaimed. "Pa can dance with you, he's the best dancer in the whole territory." Kieran's cheeks reddened slightly. "I think Mrs. Vickers would prefer to make that determination for herself," he said, giving his son a pointed look. To Penelope, he added, "We'll call for you at 7 if that's agreeable." "7 is perfect," she replied, unable to suppress a smile at his obvious embarrassment. After they left, Penelope spent the afternoon alternating between anticipation and anxiety. The social was just one evening, she reminded herself. Tomorrow, she would purchase her ticket for the next stage west and continue on as planned. Hawthorne was just a temporary stop, nothing more. But as she dressed for the evening, selecting her nicest gown and arranging her hair with unusual care, she couldn't ignore the small voice whispering that perhaps, just perhaps, there might be more to this place than she'd initially thought. The church hall was transformed for the social, with lanterns casting a warm glow over the assembled townspeople. A small band played cheerful tunes, and tables laden with pies and other treats lined one wall. Penelope, on Kieran's arm, felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement as they entered. "Mrs. Vickers, how delightful to meet you," a matronly woman greeted her. "I'm Martha Wilson, head of the town council. Kieran tells me you're a teacher." "I was, yes," Penelope confirmed, shooting Kieran a questioning look. "We're desperate for a qualified instructor, Mrs. Wilson continued, undeterred. "The salary's competitive and the position comes with housing. Would you consider staying?" Martha, Kieran intervened gently. Mrs. Vickers is on her way to a position in San Francisco. She's just passing through. Oh, but surely San Francisco has many teachers, Mrs. Wilson persisted. We have none. Just think of the difference you could make here, my dear. I'll consider it, Penelope replied diplomatically, relieved when Samuel appeared, tugging on his father's sleeve. Pa, they're playing our favorite. Can we dance? If Mrs. Vickers doesn't mind, Kieran looked to her inquiringly. Go ahead, she encouraged. I'll just sample some of these delicious-looking pies. As Kieran swung his son onto the dance floor, teaching him the steps with infinite patience, Penelope watched with a smile. Several other women joined her at the refreshment table, eager to make her acquaintance. He's a good man, Kieran Ivers, one of them commented, following her gaze. Hasn't had it easy these past 3 years raising Samuel alone after losing Rebecca. His wife, Penelope asked softly. The woman nodded. Childbirth fever. Samuel was born, but she never recovered. Kieran's devoted himself to that boy ever since. Penelope's heart ached for them both. She knew all too well the hollow feeling of loss, the way grief could reshape a life in an instant. Samuel's lucky to have him, she said, and Kieran deserves some happiness, another woman added meaningfully. A good woman would make all the difference. Before Penelope could respond, Kieran returned, his hand outstretched. Mrs. Vickers, would you honor me with a dance? The music had shifted to a waltz, and despite her misgivings, Penelope found herself accepting his hand. As they moved across the floor, she was acutely aware of his strong arm around her waist, the warmth of his hand holding hers. You dance very well, she complimented, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. Samuel exaggerates, but I manage not to step on too many toes, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. Are you enjoying yourself? Very much, she admitted. Your community is quite welcoming. They can be persistent, he acknowledged, clearly referring to Mrs. Wilson's recruitment attempt. But only because they care deeply about the town and its future. And what about you, Kieran? She asked, emboldened by the intimacy of the dance. What do you care deeply about? His eyes met hers, serious and sincere. Samuel, of course, the ranch. And the belief that everyone deserves a place where they truly belong. Something in his words struck a chord deep within her. Since losing her husband, Penelope had felt adrift, belonging nowhere and to no one. Even her planned journey to San Francisco was less about opportunity and more about escape. You feel you belong here? She asked softly. I do, he replied without hesitation. It's not perfect, but it's home. Samuel was born here, my wife is buried here, our future is here. The music ended, but they remained standing close for a moment longer than necessary. Then Samuel bounded up, breaking the spell. Can Mrs. Vickers come see our ranch tomorrow, Pa, please? Kieran looked embarrassed. Samuel, Mrs. Vickers will be purchasing her ticket west tomorrow. Actually, Penelope heard herself say, I'd love to see your ranch if the invitation is genuine. Kieran's surprise was evident. Of course it is, but I wouldn't want to delay your journey. One more day won't matter, she replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Kieran arrived with his wagon, Samuel sitting eagerly beside him. The ride to the Double I Ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Penelope had ever seen, rolling plains giving way to gentle hills, with distant mountains providing a majestic backdrop. It's breathtaking, she said as they crested a rise, the ranch buildings coming into view below. The main house was modest but well-maintained, with a wide porch and smoke curling from the chimney. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn completed the picture of frontier domesticity. It's not much, Kieran said, almost apologetically, but it's growing. We started with just 50 head of cattle and this patch of land. Now we're up to 300 head and twice the acreage. Don't diminish your achievements, she admonished gently. It's impressive what you've built here. A middle-aged woman emerged from the house as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. There you are, I was beginning to worry. Mrs. Jensen, this is Mrs. Vickers, Kieran introduced. Mrs. Vickers, our housekeeper, Mrs. Jensen. "Pleased to meet you," the housekeeper said warmly. "Lunch is nearly ready. I've made extra knowing how this one eats." She ruffled Samuel's hair affectionately. "Can I show Mrs. Vickers my pony first?" Samuel asked, bouncing with impatience. "Go on, then," Kieran agreed with a smile, "but don't keep her too long. Mrs. Jensen's cooking deserves prompt attention." Samuel gave them a whirlwind tour of the ranch, his pony, the chickens, his favorite climbing tree, and the small creek that ran along the property's edge. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Penelope found herself laughing more than she had in years. Lunch was a simple but delicious affair: freshly baked bread, hearty beef stew, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with Samuel dominating much of it, peppering Penelope with questions about Chicago and her life as a teacher. "You have any children, Mrs. Vickers?" he asked innocently as they finished their pie. A lump formed in her throat. "No, Samuel, my husband and I, we didn't have that blessing." Kieran gave his son a warning look, but Penelope shook her head slightly, signaling it was all right. "I lost my husband to influenza 3 years ago," she explained, keeping her voice steady. "We'd only been married a year." "I'm sorry," Samuel said, his young face solemn. "Pa says my mama watches over me from heaven. Maybe your husband does too." "Samuel," Kieran began, but Penelope interrupted. "It's a lovely thought," she said, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you, Samuel." After lunch, while Samuel went with Mrs. Jensen to help feed the chickens, Kieran invited Penelope to join him on the porch. They sat in comfortable rocking chairs, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. "I apologize for Samuel's question," Kieran said after a moment. "Children have a way of asking the very things adults avoid." "There's no need to apologize," she assured him. "His heart is in the right place. He likes you," Kieran observed. "I haven't seen him take to someone so quickly since, well, in a very long time." "I like him too," she admitted. "He's a remarkable boy. You've done an excellent job raising him." "I've tried," Kieran said, his voice softening. "It hasn't been easy doing it alone. There are days I worry I'm not enough for him." "From what I've seen, you're more than enough," Penelope assured him. "The way he looks at you, the pride in his voice when he talks about you, it's clear he adores you." Kieran's gaze met hers, gratitude, and something deeper reflected in his eyes. "That means a great deal coming from you." They fell silent, but it was a comfortable silence, broken only by the creak of the rocking chairs and the distant sounds of ranch life. Penelope found herself imagining what it would be like to sit here every evening watching the sun set over the Wyoming plains. "When do you leave?" Kieran asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I haven't purchased my ticket yet," she replied. "But soon, I suppose. And if you stayed?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Before she could respond, Samuel came running up the porch steps. Pa, Mrs. Jensen says it's going to storm, and can we take Mrs. Vickers back to town before it hits?" Kieran looked up at the sky, where dark clouds were indeed gathering on the horizon. "Mrs. Jensen is right, as usual. We should get you back to town before the weather turns." The ride back was more hurried than their morning journey, with thunder rumbling in the distance. Despite Kieran's best efforts, the storm caught them when they were still a mile from town. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them within minutes despite the wagon's canvas cover. By the time they reached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, they were drenched and shivering. The landlady took one look at them and sprang into action, ordering hot baths and dry clothes for all. "You'll stay for supper," she informed Kieran and Samuel in a tone that brooked no argument. "No sense in heading back out in this weather." The evening passed pleasantly, with Samuel regaling them with stories of ranch adventures while they ate Mrs. Holloway's hearty stew. After dinner, the boy's eyelids began to droop, and Kieran carried him to the sofa in the parlor, covering him with a quilt. "He's had a big day," he explained, rejoining Penelope by the fire. "The excitement of showing you the ranch, then the storm, it wore him out." "Thank you for today," she said softly. "It was wonderful. Even the drenching?" he asked with a smile. "Even that," she confirmed, returning his smile. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Outside, the storm continued, rain lashing against the windows. "Penelope," Kieran said finally, using her given name for the first time. "I know we've only just met, but I feel as though I've known you much longer." "I feel the same," she admitted, her heart racing. "I don't want to pressure you, but I need to be honest," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "I'd like you to consider staying in Hawthorne. Not just for the teaching position, though the town desperately needs you, but because—" He hesitated, then pressed on. "Because I believe you could find happiness here. Samuel adores you already, and I've come to care for you very quickly." Penelope's breath caught. "Kieran, you don't have to answer now," he assured her hastily. "Just promise you'll think about it before you purchase that ticket west." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. In just 3 days, this man and his son had awakened feelings she thought had died with her husband. The prospect both thrilled and terrified her. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a freshly washed world. Kieran and Samuel departed after breakfast, with promises to see her at church the following day. Penelope spent the day wandering through Hawthorne, seeing it with new eyes. She visited the schoolhouse again, running her hands along the dusty desks, imagining the space filled with eager young minds. She walked past the small teacher's cottage, peeking in the windows at its simple but welcoming interior. She stopped at the general store, where the proprietor greeted her by name and inquired if she'd be staying. "I'm still deciding," she told him honestly. By afternoon, her feet had carried her to the small cemetery on the outskirts of town. She walked among the gravestones until she found the one she sought, Rebecca Ivers, beloved wife and mother, 1853–1873. "Hello, Rebecca," she said softly, feeling only slightly foolish for speaking to a stone. "Your son is wonderful, so full of life and joy, and your husband. He's a good man, an honorable man. I think you'd be proud of the way he's raising Samuel." A gentle breeze stirred the wildflowers growing around the grave. "I lost someone too," Penelope continued. "My James. And for 3 years I've been running from that loss, thinking I could outpace the grief if I just went far enough." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But seeing Kieran and Samuel, how they've built a life here despite their loss. It makes me wonder if I've been running in the wrong direction all this time." The next morning, Penelope dressed with particular care for church. The small building was filled to capacity, with Kieran and Samuel saving her a place in their pew. Throughout the service, she was acutely aware of Kieran beside her, their shoulders occasionally brushing. After the final hymn, Mrs. Wilson approached, her expression hopeful. "Have you given any more thought to our teaching position, Mrs. Vickers?" Penelope glanced at Kieran, who was carefully not looking at her, then at Samuel, whose hopeful expression mirrored Mrs. Wilson's. "I have," she replied, "and if the offer still stands, I'd like to accept." The news spread quickly through the congregation. Penelope found herself surrounded by well-wishers, parents eager to enroll their children, and council members discussing details of her contract. Through it all, she kept stealing glances at Kieran, who stood slightly apart, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When the crowd finally dispersed, he approached, Samuel skipping alongside him. "You're staying," he said, his voice filled with quiet joy. "I'm staying," she confirmed. "It seems Hawthorne needs a teacher." "Is it only the teaching position that convinced you?" he asked, his gaze searching hers. Before she could respond, Samuel tugged at her skirt. "Does this mean you can come to our ranch again, and maybe stay for dinner? And maybe read me a bedtime story like Mrs. Jensen sometimes does?" "Samuel," Kieran began, but Penelope knelt down to the boy's level. "I'd love to visit your ranch again," she told him, "and dinner and bedtime stories sound wonderful." Samuel's face lit up. "And maybe someday you could stay forever. You could be my—" "Samuel," Kieran interrupted firmly. "Mrs. Vickers has just agreed to be our teacher. Let's not overwhelm her with additional requests." But Samuel wasn't deterred. He looked straight at Penelope, his blue eyes wide and earnest. "You could be my new mama, Pa needs a wife and I need a mama and you need a home. We could all be home together. Penelope's heart stuttered in her chest as she glanced up at Kieran, whose face had flushed crimson. I apologize, he said quickly. Samuel, that's enough. Mrs. Vickers, Penelope, please know that while my son lacks discretion, his heart is in the right place. Standing, she took a deep breath. There's no need to apologize. Samuel is only being honest about what he wants. And what do you want, Penelope? Kieran asked quietly. I came to Hawthorne thinking I was just passing through, she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering of her heart. But somewhere along the way, something changed. When Samuel looks at me, I don't see a stranger or just a teacher, I see someone who belongs. Kieran took a step closer. You do belong, he said softly. If you want to, I do, she whispered. I want to stay. Not just for the teaching position, but for the possibility of something more. With time. Samuel, who had been watching this exchange with growing impatience, suddenly threw his arms around her waist. Does this mean you're staying forever, that you'll be home with us? Penelope looked down at the boy, then up at his father, seeing in both their faces the promise of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. Home, she repeated, testing the word. Yes, Samuel, I think I've found my home at last. Kieran's smile was radiant as he took her hand in his. Welcome home, Penelope Vickers. 2 years later, on a bright September morning, Penelope stood on the porch of the Double I Ranch, watching as Kieran taught their infant son to wave goodbye to his big brother. Samuel, now 8, was proudly mounted on his pony, ready for his ride to the Hawthorne schoolhouse where Penelope would join him later, after Mrs. Jensen arrived to look after baby James. Are you sure you're ready to go back to teaching? Kieran asked, coming to stand beside her with the baby in his arms. James is only 6 months old. You could wait until spring. I'm ready, she assured him, reaching up to stroke their son's downy head. Besides, I promised the town council I'd return after harvest. Always keeping your promises, he said with a smile, leaning down to kiss her softly. That's one of the many reasons I love you. She returned his kiss, her heart full to bursting. From uncertain beginnings, a widow just passing through, a widower raising his son alone, they had forged something beautiful and enduring. Samuel had been right all along. What they all needed was a place to belong, a place to call home. And here, on this ranch under the vast Wyoming sky, they had found it together.